Rational ignorance. The deliberate choice to remain uninformed about something because the expected cost of acquiring the information exceeds its expected benefit. Ironically, this is a video about one of the reasons why so few people will actually watch this video. It's rational in the economic sense, a calculated decision that the ignorance is more cost-effective than the knowledge. The concept comes from public choice theory and was developed by Anthony Downs in his 1957 book, An Economic Theory of Democracy. It was initially applied to voter behavior, but has since been extended to many domains. His work, along with several others in the field, was exploring what if we analyze politics the way we analyze markets? What if we treated voters, politicians, and bureaucrats as rational, self-interested actors rather than civic-minded idealists? Downs was treating voters as consumers choosing between products, candidates, parties, politicians as entrepreneurs seeking to maximize votes the way firms seek to maximize profits, and elections as markets where policies are exchanged for votes. He built his model on four key premises. Rational actors. Everyone acts to maximize their utility based on self-interest. Imperfect information that is costly to acquire. Self-interested politicians who want to win elections primarily to enjoy the income, prestige, or power of office, not to implement particular policies. And policy-motivated voters. Voters care about policy, but face information costs. Within this, rational ignorance emerged as almost inevitable. Downs calculated what he called the expected return from voting. Stick with me here for a moment. The expected return equals the benefit if the preferred candidate wins, minus the benefit if the other candidate wins, times the probability that your vote decides the election. Since the probability of a single vote deciding election is infinitesimally small, in 1957 he estimated that at 1 in 10 million. Even large policy differences between candidates produces almost zero expected return from voting. Now add the cost of becoming informed, reading platforms, studying issues, evaluating candidate records, and you get his result. The rational citizen remains ignorant. Some critics found it cynical, some found it illuminating, finding that it finally explained things that other theories couldn't account for, like why voters knew so little and why that didn't seem to bother them. But on to some of the broader applications of this. Consumer decisions, probably the most day in, day out application. The basic logic is for low stakes purchases. Exhaustive research is a waste of time. Say you're buying a $5 sandwich for lunch. First off, congratulations on finding a $5 sandwich these days. But you could research all the nearby restaurants, read reviews across multiple platforms, compare all the nutritional information, evaluate sourcing, labor practices, calculate price per calorie ratios. Or you could just pick a place that looks okay and get on with your life. Let's say you think your time is worth $20 an hour, and it takes you an hour to research all that. For a $5 sandwich, you've lost money on the deal. This problem gets more interesting as you scale up. For low stakes purchases under $20, rational ignorance is highly efficient. We tend to use simple heuristics like brand recognition, previous experience, proximity, what's on sale. For medium stakes, like $100 to $1,000, it gets a little more important. A $1,000 laptop arguably deserves more research than a sandwich. But how much more? An hour? 10 hours? There's a sweet spot in there somewhere where most people satisfice. They research until they found something good enough, rather than guaranteeing that they found the absolute best option. Best, with most things being a relative term anyway. In high-stakes purchases like cars, houses, major appliances, rational ignorance becomes less rational, but people still exhibit it. Why? Complexity. Modern products are incredibly complex. Understanding what makes one car better than another requires technical knowledge that most people lack. Even extensive research leaves you partially ignorant. So why bother with that last 30% of knowledge when you've spent so much time convincing yourself that you have the first 70%? Reliable heuristics exist to satisfy most people. Things like consumer reports, online reviews, brand reputation. They let people outsource the research, giving them good enough information relatively cheaply. The search cost. Decision fatigue is real. At some point, more research feels worse than just deciding. Just pick something. Barry Schwartz's paradox of choice applies here. Too many options and too much information can paralyze or leave us with a feeling of dissatisfaction. Marketing exploits this. Companies know most consumers won't research thoroughly, so they optimize surface-level signals like attractive packaging, prominent but meaningless features, celebrity endorsements. Rational ignorance creates space for irrational manipulation. Current information environment actually complicates this. You'd think the internet would solve it. Practically infinite product information at your fingertips. But too much information is just as bad as not enough. Filtering through it all becomes the cost. Fake reviews. When reviews are manipulated and so much of things like best of or top 10 lists or just affiliate marketing, research quality declines as quantity increases. Add to this the tailored results that you get, these little personalization bubbles. You might not even be able to see the full market of what you're researching. We've shifted from information is hard to find to trustworthy information is hard to find. It's more of an annoyance when you get a crappy sandwich, but it can be a significant problem in categories like complex financial products, credit cards, mortgages, insurance policies, things like that. Most people don't understand this stuff because you just about have to be an expert to do so. They are designed to be complex or confusing, and your ignorance about them can cost you thousands. And then in addictive or harmful products like cigarettes, junk food, or just food in general, gambling, these combine with present bias to cause problems. You don't research the long-term harm because your future self pays the cost, while your present self enjoys the benefits. There are things like credence goods, products where you can't easily calculate even after purchasing them. Things like services, repairs, legal. You're ignorant going in, and you're often ignorant after the fact. This creates opportunities for fraud. Products with environmental or social cost. You're rationally ignorant about the supply chains because they can be so diffuse and distant. The true cost of a cheap shirt is practically invisible to most of us. Then markets have evolved responses to at least make us think they're trying to help. Things like warranties, guarantees, licensing and certifications, return policies, brand reputation. aggregate reviewers, but nothing is perfect. The market of information itself has information problems. Who reviews the reviewers? Who gives oversight to the overseers? The next two areas where rational ignorance has been extensively studied are almost impossible to talk about without being either woefully inadequate or going extremely in depth. These are medical decisions and workplace considerations. I'm going to opt for woefully inadequate in this video, but if you would like me to go into either or both of those, just let me know. I'd be happy to do so. But for medical, rational ignorance gets really important because the stakes can be enormous and the knowledge barriers are even more extreme. With consumer goods, becoming an expert is possible if you're willing to invest the time. With medical, the gap between consumer and expert is vast and probably unbridgeable for most decisions. Most of us have Google and whatever remnants of high school biology remains. The workplace scenario is completely different from the consumer or the medical aspects because you're not browsing between options. You're part of an organization. And depending on where you work, complex power structures, incentive systems, information flows, and you depend, or your job depends, on you being able to navigate this stuff. In workplace decisions, your ignorance exists within a web of relationships where information is strategic, often deliberately obscured. The consequences are varied and numerous. Like I said, there's a ton of relevant and potentially useful information about rational ignorance in the workplace if you'd like to hear it. Next up is the free rider problem. This is where rational ignorance can become truly toxic on a collective level. Free rider is where public good benefits everyone regardless of whether or not they contribute to it. Rational individuals don't contribute. They free ride on others' contributions because contributing is costly in some way. They get the benefit even if they don't, and their individual contribution is negligible. When everyone thinks this way, the public good isn't provided, and everyone is worse off. Now add information costs to this. Not only do you have no incentive to contribute to solving a collective problem, you have no incentive to even learn about the collective problem. With Down's calculation here, the cost is the time and effort of researching the problem. The benefit of learning is the ability to contribute to the solution. But your individual contribution won't solve the problem. So you stay ignorant and hope others learn about it and fix it. When everyone makes this calculation, nobody learns, nobody acts, and the problem grows into a crisis. Apply this to the voting case mentioned earlier. Good governance is a public good. Everyone benefits from a well-run government, regardless of whether they voted or how well-informed their vote was. So people stay ignorant. Researching costs time. They assume others will be well-informed voters whose votes will produce good governance. So they free ride while benefiting from the outcome. But if everyone thinks this way, nobody becomes informed. The result is a poorly informed public making poor collective decisions. This is worse than just rational ignorance. It's free rider rational ignorance. You aren't just choosing not to learn because your individual vote doesn't matter. You're choosing not to learn because you're counting on others to do the learning and voting while you just coast along. Some classic example of this is HOAs, homeowners associations, open source software maintenance, climate, environmental issues, neighborhood crime and safety networks, workplace safety and ethics issues, school boards and local politics. Free rider rational ignorance is very closely related to the tragedy of the commons, where everyone overuses a shared resource because individual benefit exceeds individual costs, but both of them compound. You aren't only overusing the commons, you're also rationally ignorant about how depleted the commons is becoming. It spirals into crisis in a few predictable ways: slow motion disasters, infrastructure decay, pension underfunding, environmental degradation. The cost of ignorance is always deferred. The problem is always later, and often too late, to have easy solutions. Diffusion of responsibility. Surely the experts are handling this, or someone must be paying attention to this. Lots of people vaguely concerned, nobody taking responsibility to become informed and act. Capture by motivated minorities. If 95% of the people are rationally ignorant and 5% are intensely interested, especially if they're interested for self-serving reasons, that 5% will dominate decisions. You see school boards captured by activists, regulatory agencies captured by industry, HOAs run by busybodies. Cascading ignorance. And you have cascading ignorance. Everyone ignorant, assuming everyone else isn't. When the cascade becomes visible, everyone starts to realize that nobody knew anything. You get panics and crashes. Societies have instituted some responses to this, however imperfect. Things like mandatory participation, jury duty, mandatory voting in some countries, required training, required certification programs. But these can't enforce engagement, just participation. Specialization and representation, like elected representatives, hiring experts and professionals, creating watchdog organizations and regulatory agencies. You're still ignorant, but you've delegated this to specialists. This works great when they're trustworthy and properly incentivized, not so much when they're captured, incompetent, or corrupt. Sometimes crisis reaction forces a collective learning, like after a disaster. Everyone is suddenly paying attention, but this is reactive, not preventative. You're learning after the damage is done, and people very often resort to former habits all too quickly after it's over. Another way is cultivating social norms, that it's shameful to be ignorant about civic matters, etc. This tries to make ignorance socially costly, but this often induces performance, making people pretend to be informed. It also creates gatekeepers who exacerbate the problem in many ways. I think I'll revisit this aspect in a future video. It gets pretty interesting in how it interacts with and informs some of the other types of ignorance, the gatekeeper thing. Another way to try and respond is to make information cheaper. Better media, simplified explanations, user-friendly government data. But information overload can be a bigger problem than information scarcity in some ways. Then there's the skin in the game aspect. Nassim Taleb, who I've talked about before, has a principle of people pay attention when they personally bear the consequences. But many public goods problems have such wide-ranging consequences, national debt, infrastructure decay, climate, that people don't directly experience the effects of their contribution to the problem. The free rider problem, like almost every type of ignorance, is subject to itself. People can stay rationally ignorant to rational ignorance. Someone else will think about it. So 3 things I could return to if you're interested: medical decisions, workplace dynamics, and the gatekeeper problem. Let me know if you would like that. They're all three a video in and of themselves. They're all three really interesting as well. But next week, I'll dig into epistemic blind spots, those areas where our cognitive biases, cultural assumptions, conceptual frameworks prevent us from even conceiving of certain possibilities or asking certain questions. Until then, thanks for watching. But information overload can be a bigger problem than information scarcity in some ways. Then there's the skin in the game aspect. Nassim Taleb, who I've talked about before, has a principle of people pay attention when they personally bear the consequences. But many public goods problems have But many public goods problems have such wide-ranging consequences, national debt, infrastructure decay, climate, that people don't directly experience the effects of their contribution to the problem. The free rider problem, like almost every type of ignorance, is subject to itself. People can stay rationally ignorant to rational ignorance. Someone else will think about it. So, three things I could return to if you're interested: medical decisions, workplace dynamics, and the gatekeeper problem. Let me know if you would like that. They're all three a video in and of themselves. They're all three really interesting as well. But next week, I'll dig into epistemic blind spots, those areas where our cognitive biases, cultural assumptions, conceptual frameworks prevent us from even conceiving of certain possibilities or asking certain questions. Until then, thanks for watching.